Hilchos Sharavos Hatumos Perek Shisha Asar. The laws of the remaining primary sources of impurity, chapter 16. The last 2 days, we've got the list of the 12 lenient doubts. 12 cases where you go leniently in case of a doubt. 4 of them on one day, 8 of them on the other day. Today we're going to zoom in onto one of them. Sveik Tuma B'Rshus HaRabim. The doubt of impurity that arises in a public domain. The Rambam told us that if there's an issue of impurity and you're not sure if you touched a source of impurity in a public domain, you're always pure. In a private domain, typically, you're impure. Today we're going to discuss the reasons for this, the parameters that guide when we say these rules, and when there are exceptions, and even in a private domain, we're going to rule pure out of doubt. It says the Rambam Halacha Aleph, Mipnei ma tiyaru chachamim sveik tuma b'rshus harabim. Why did the rabbis declare a doubt in a private domain to be pure? Any case of doubt in the Torah, we always go stringently. Why here leniently? Says the Rambam, Shahari hatzibur oisin pesach betuma bizman shahatmeim merubim. If we can recall, laws of the Korban Pesach, we said, if the majority of Jews become impure before Pesach from a corpse, so we perform the entire procedure of the Korban Pesach in a state of impurity. And now we have a kal v'chomer, a logical deduction. Im tuma vadois nidches mipneihem. If in the public arena, when dealing with a community, certain, definite impurity is overridden by the community, kal v'chomer l'sveik tuma. Certainly it's only a doubt. A doubtful impurity should for sure be pushed away in a public domain, which is related to the idea of a community. Now, obviously, one could make the argument that the very fact that definite tumah is pushed away by Korban Pesach tells you that there's something special about Korban Pesach. And maybe you cannot learn from there to other parts of the Torah. So the Rambam immediately clarifies, she'isur kol hasfeikas midivreim. The reason we're able to make this, to draw this logic is because to begin with, all doubtful impurities are rabbinic, as we explained in the laws of forbidden relationships, and therefore we can use the leniency we see by Korban Pesach to apply to any other case of doubtful impurity. Now that Rambam asks the opposite side. Why were they strict in a case of a doubt that arises in a private domain? Now, what do you mean why? The premise of the question in the beginning of the chapter was everything should be impure. Why did you make the public domain pure? We have a reason. So once we have a reason, why do we care? Why do we need a reason now for the private domain? So a lot of discussion here in the Rambam. One of the approaches is taken by Rabbi Shimon Shkop, one of the great Talmudic analysts, and he said that the understanding over here is that doubts don't have an automatic default law. Hashem gave the rabbis the authority to decide what to do in cases of doubt. So once you have a reason to go leniently in one case of doubt, why not make all doubts equal? That's what he wants to know. Why here you're going pure and here you're going impure? There has to be something unique about inherently to every domain that makes them be treated in this way. What's unique to the public domain? Korban Pesach. What's unique to the private domain? Says the Rambam, Shari Soita Shenistara. We have the case of the Soita, the suspected adulteress. She may have committed adultery with another man, and to resolve the doubt, we take her to the Beis HaMikdash, a whole procedure, she drinks water, a whole thing. And all we know is that she was in seclusion with the other man. We don't know that for sure anything happened. Even though it's a doubt, we make her forbidden to her husband until she drinks the waters. What does that tell you? That once you're in a private domain, in a hidden, secluded place, doubts always become stringent. That's talking about impurity for relationship. This is talking about ritual impurity, but the same parallel can be drawn. Since we're only deriving the law from the Saita, so the same way that when it's a Saita with her, the man who's committing adultery with her, her adulterer, there are 2 people in total, so you cannot be stricter than that, only in similar cases. So the doubts that are going to develop in Rishus HaYachid and are going to be considered to be stringently is only if there are a maximum of 2 people involved. But if it's 3 people in a private domain and there's a doubt about some impurity, for them, it's like a public domain. And any doubts of impurity that arise for them are considered to be pure. Now says the Rambam another larger caveat to the laws of private domain impurity. When do we say that doubts in Rishus HaYachid are impure? If the person who has the doubt, he has a mature mind, intelligence, to be able to be asked questions, and to have an inquiry made as to what happened. And that's also learned from a Saita, Kisaita. It's a human being, she's an adult, she's intelligent. But if it was a deaf mute, mentally unstable person, a child, he won't know how to answer properly when you ask him detailed questions. So doubts that occur to such a person, even in a private domain, are ruled to be pure. Again, because we learn from the Saita. And how does this look practically? Deaf mute, mentally unstable person, child with lacking intelligence to be asked questions. And you discover them in a courtyard or in an open lane, an alleyway that has a source of impurity there. A dead body, a rodent. Safek nagu, safek le nagu, and they're in doubt whether they touched it or not. To hayden, they are pure. And so too, anything which cannot be asked, like objects. Can't ask a fruit, hey, did the corpse touch you or not? Not gonna, can't communicate. So, them too, afal pi, even though there's a doubt that arose among them in a private domain, the doubt will be resolved as lenient, as pure, because it has to be like a saita who can be spoken to with a conversation. Halacha gimel hasuma, a blind person, b'hayashin, somebody sleeping. Somebody walking at night, if they have a doubt that arises in a private domain, they're still impure. Even though, technically speaking, they should lose their status of das lihishoyel. When a person is sleeping or blind, he can't know all the information necessarily. But still, at his core, right now they don't see. But their intelligence level is as a mature human being, mature adult, and therefore they fall into that rubric, and doubts are impure. Now when do we say that if you don't have enough intelligence, you're going to be ruled pure in case of doubt? If it's an equal doubt, there's no presumptive status to presume that he would be impure. But if there's a chazaka, a presumption that he became impure, even if it's not definite, but it's pretty presumable, then you are impure, even if you cannot be asked. Ketzad, what does this look like? You have a small child who is discovered next to a dough. And he's holding some dough. And the dough is pure. Important to note that, okay? So the kid is impure from a different source of impurity. And the dough is pure. Now he's holding a dough. Question is, did he take a piece of dough from the dough itself, thereby making the whole dough impure? Or maybe somebody here came by, plucked the piece of dough and gave it to the kid, but the rest of the dough remains pure. So since it's a presumption, who probably took the dough out? The kid. So the dough is impure. Because it's normal for a child to touch and to feel around and to grab the dough. This is the presumed status of the kid, and therefore he's impure. On the other hand, it's not so strict. We're not going to burn the truma, let's say if it was truma, based on this presumption. However, we are going to declare it to be impure. Take a look at the following case. You have in your house impure liquid, but a pure dough. And you have at home some pets, an animal, a beast, a bird. And then you come and you discover in your dough, there's a place bitten out. So clearly your animal or your bird took a bite. The question is now, it's a doubt. Maybe they touched the liquid before they bit into the dough. Maybe not. But there's a chazaka here. Chazaka, says the Rambam, you can presume shashasu mashkin v'nashchu babatzik. The first thing he did was took a drink, and now there's all this liquid around them that's impure. Then they bit into the dough v'tim uhu, and therefore they made it impure. Haisasham para, but if there was a cow, ubeina mashkin v'habatzik kedishetelachik es l'shayna. Okay, so the first case wasn't a cow. Okay, delete that. This case is the cow. You have a cow, and between the area of the liquid and the dough, there's enough space that it could lick its tongue between the liquid and the dough. Then the dough remains pure because it would have cleaned out the liquid from its mouth, the impure liquid, and touching the dough is from the start, it's pure. Other animals, the distance has to be not to lick its tongue, but kedisha tenagev es piha. Enough time to dry its mouth. So whatever that is for each animal. Less than that, there's a chazaka. They touch the liquid in the dough, and it's impure. If it was a dog, even if the liquid is right next to the dough, it's pure. Dogs don't leave food and go to water. If they have food, straight for the food. He didn't go to the liquid and the food. He for sure bit from the dough first and then went to the liquid. So the dough is pure. Nimtza babatzek nekiras hatar negolim. Let's say you found in a dough that it's been pecked at by chickens. Okay, I couldn't find the dough, but just look at it. Let's just treat this as a dough, okay? The white thing here. It was pecked at by chickens. And now there's liquid there also, it's impure. If there's distance between the liquid and the dough, enough that they could knock their mouth into the ground and dry it up thereby, the dough is pure. If not, then it's impure. And the presumption is they took a little drink, and then using that liquid, they pecked the dough. When do we say that it's impure? When the liquid was clear liquid. Where you can see the reflection of a child if he looks into the water or the liquid. If they were murky, and the dough in all scenarios is pure. If the chickens had first pecked into the liquid, which is dirty and murky, you would see it in the dough. And if you don't, or the fact that you don't, tells you that it's pure. If the liquid on the other hand was clear, even though we just said the dough is presumed to be impure, so same as before, you don't burn truma for coming into contact with this, you leave it hanging in the balance. In the end of the day, it's a doubt. There's a chazaka, so we're making it impure, but not going to make it so impure to be burnt. Halacha hey, ezahi chazaka shesurfin aleh b'shas yachid. Is there a case where it gets even further? The presumption is so strong that based on the presumption, we'll declare it impure and we'll also burn truma over that. Says the Rambam there is. Isa babayis, you have a dough in the home. Ushratzim utzfardim minupolin sham. And there are pieces of rodents and frogs all over the house. Bunch of dead rodents and frogs. Rodents are impure. Dead frogs are not impure. They're not one of the 8 shratzim. And now you find some of the pieces of these bodies in the dough. I'd be far away from this dough in a second without the laws of ritual impurity, but I guess everything was important back in the day. You had to know, can I use the dough or not? It says that if most of the fallen pieces belong to dead rodents that are impure, the chazaka here will make the dough impure, and it will even be burnt if it's truma. If it's mostly frogs, then it's pure. And there's no chazaka there on the impure side. A person has either a source of impurity or a source of purity next to him or on top of him. And he wraps himself with a talis. Now everyone knows when you're in shul, you wrap a talis, you can kind of spread a little bit. Now, maybe the corners of your talis while you were wrapping yourselves touched these tumas and taras. In other words, first they touched the source of impurity, then they touched the pure stuff and made it impure. If they're in a private domain, disqualified, impure. Because even though the source of the impurity here will be the talis, and the cloth cannot be asked anything, it doesn't have das li yishoel, but it was the person who was manipulating the talis. And so that's called a tumah that came through a person, and he could be spoken to, investigated about the circumstances, and therefore it's a classic suffix tumah b'shas and will make him impure. Even if it's not a case where the person is holding the cloak. Let's just say there's a utensil on the ground, and the person is next to it, and there's a doubt whether there was a contact here. The utensil will become impure, giving it the status of somebody that could be investigated, because the person's right there. If they were in a public domain and this thing took place, it's always pure. If even in the public domain, the way the talis was going, it was just basically impossible that he wouldn't touch it, then he is considered to be impure. Halacha Zayin. Here's a picture from the Rambam, the Chitrik Rambam, to describe this case. Kikar shal truma shanasum lagabe hadaf. You have a truma loaf of bread on top of a shelf. Umidras nasun tachta. Right under it is something that's midras. It means a zav stepped on it, sat on it, light on it, whatever it is. It's tameh. Okay? And it's under this shelf in such a way that if the loaf were to fall off the shelf, it has to touch the thing that's medras. Even though it's on a diagonal, which now leaves more room for suspicion. Because now even if you find the loaf of bread on the floor, it doesn't prove that it didn't touch the medrash. See, if it was straight, and you find a loaf on the floor, then obviously it got onto the floor with someone else's intervention. Because if it would have fallen, it would have hit the medrash and stayed there. Now it's on a diagonal. Even if you found it on the floor, it could still be that it bounced onto the medrash and then bounced off. So there's more reason when it's on a diagonal to be stringent. Nevertheless, says the Rambam, if you come and find the loaf somewhere else, not on the shelf, not on the medrash, it remains pure. I can say, somebody pure came and took it off the shelf, put it onto the floor. Except if the person says, the owner of the loaf says, I'm sure nobody came in here, then it's impure. Then for sure it fell. And when it fell, since that's the way it was situated, it obviously touched the medrash. You find a kid near a cemetery holding roses. I guess roses and cemeteries went hand in hand for many generations. Now, you look around. The only place you find roses growing is in a place near a source of impurity. Nevertheless, out of doubt, you can presume the child to be pure. How did he get the roses? Maybe somebody else who was pure picked them and gave them to him. Same if you have a donkey. Not sure why there'd be a donkey, but let's say there's a donkey standing in the middle of a cemetery. Kelev to hide him. Anything he's carrying is pure. We don't say maybe he crouched down on the ground and touched a grave with his load. Because a chamor, a donkey cannot be investigated. When you found the donkey, nothing was touching any graves. As we had yesterday, all impurities are decided by the moment that you discover them. Halacha test, if you have a child who is holding his father's hand, or is riding on his father's shoulder, then even if he's in a shusayachit, and we said before that a child cannot be investigated, but now that he's with his father, he's impure, because you can investigate the father about what happened to the child. When it comes to a child experiencing doubtful impurity, if you want to summarize it, we have 4 laws, 4 cases. Number 1, you have a kid, he's too young, can't walk yet. His mother leaves him somewhere. She comes back and finds him as he is. As he is, the commentators say, means, let's say he's still wearing clothes. And in the same location. Tahir, the baby can be presumed to be pure. We don't say maybe a woman who's impure, let's say on her cycle, came and hugged and kissed the baby. No, it's the same scenario, you're good. Second scenario, the baby is now old enough that he can walk around without any help. And the woman here, the mother in this case, is what's called an Eshes Chaver. She's the wife of a Chaver, person who is scrupulous in laws of purity. Begadav Tohirin ve'enan midras kishar bigdei amaret. So this baby is considered to be part of the household, and his clothes can be considered to be pure. Unlike, let's say, Am Ha'aretz's clothes, that for the people that keep a higher standard, the Chaver, they consider their clothes to be impure. This baby's clothes can actually be considered pure. Nevertheless, even though they're pure, they're not midras, to begin with, initially you won't do anything pure with them because the kid is going around. You don't know exactly what's going to be with him. The mother can't keep an eye on him all the time. Number 3, third scenario for a kid. Now he's old enough, he could even be investigated. You can ask him questions, he answers maturely. So classic. Now, like anybody else, if he's in doubt of impurity in private domain, he's impure. And the fourth case is, he's even older than that. He'll not only answer questions, he can guard himself. Guard himself means he won't come into contact with corpses, he won't carry them, he won't go into the same room. This is kids' lives back then. You have to know what's impure, what's pure. Then, you can even let him touch pure things, truma, sacrificial meat. But only with his body, not with his hands, because hands are busy. If he even is old enough to know how to guard his hands, even if his hands touch pure things, we'll eat them, because we trust him completely. How do we know to check him? If he can guard his hands or guard his body, we put him in the mikveh, and we give him a piece of chulin, and we tell him this is truma, and we watch how he behaves. If he can watch his body, then anything his body contacts stays pure. If we watch and he even keeps his hands careful and keeps his hands pure, then we can even eat pure things based on what he touches with his hands. We'll consider it to be pure because we see that he can guard his hands and keep them pure.